A normal day is a normal day, right? Then there are those exciting days. Days where you're throwing a casual get together for your social circle. Or, to fit this case better, let's say party buddies. You know them, they know you. Everyone knows each other. Everyone is laughing, the music is loud, everyone's playing, everything feels completely safe and normal. 5 people in a cozy Saint Petersburg apartment, just having fun. What could possibly go wrong? Well, apparently everything. It started off as just a gathering of 5, but as the night blurred into early morning, the atmosphere shifted. Sensing a dark change in the room, 2 of the guests, they decided to walk out the front door. Then that left 3. Inside the locked apartment, a drug-fueled paranoid nightmare was just about to be triggered. The 2 men left wouldn't just take someone's life. High on a mix of toxic narcotics and alcohol, they would grab 3 kitchen knives and stab a woman, do an unthinkable 581 times. Later in court, they would claim that they only did it because the woman she hallucinated and told them that she was a witch. This is the story of 25-year-old single mother Elizaveta K, a locked room, and an absolute act of overkill. Salutations, everyone. I am the author and the founder of the Blxck Archive, a true crime podcast that forces us to look at all crimes, but especially those that live in the dead center of the system. Not the ones in the total dark that are completely buried, not covered by mainstream media sensation. We look right in the middle, where the files are public record, yet the deepest, most unsettling truths aren't highlighted at all. To truly understand our legal system, its blind spots, and obviously its failures, we have to examine a broad spectrum of cases. Now, that includes everything from historical mysteries to graphic, devastating murders, where loopholes they become a killer's first line of defense. Today we're talking about a devastating crime that happened the summer of 2025 in Saint Petersburg, a case that starts with a casual get-together, which eventually leads to heavy substance abuse and ends with 581 stab wounds. This is a real, ugly, horrifying crime. It forces us to look at how quickly a night of just hanging out can dissolve into something truly inhumane. Before we get into it, though, I want to establish some heavy content warnings. This episode covers extreme violence, murder, drug use, and the death of a young mother. If that's too much right now, please pause and come back whenever you're ready. We'll be right here. This case is gruesome and is heavy on violence and death. Nothing matters more than your mental health, so please take a break if needed. Now let's open today's case with an open mind and most importantly, an open heart. Picture a regular apartment on a street in Russia, located in the Moscow district of St. Petersburg. This isn't a luxury high-rise apartment, nor is it a slum. It's one of those classic withered Soviet-era blocks, monolithic concrete structures where hundreds of lives, they interact in a messy, quiet, ordinary way. Behind one of the heavy doors lived 25-year-old Elizaveta K. Her full name isn't disclosed due to Russia's privacy laws, so we will just be referring to her as her first name, Elizaveta. To the outside world, Elizaveta was struggling. She was a mother of a 4-year-old that she no longer had custody of. Her child lived with a grandmother, a separation caused by Elizaveta's deepening downward spiral into alcohol and heavy narcotics. But according to those who knew her best, like her close friend, Elizaveta wasn't giving up. She had moments where she tried so desperately to pull her life back together. The days leading up to the fateful summer night, she had actually reached quite a turning point. She'd found a job. She was actively packing her bags, getting ready to escape the suffocating city heat to visit her friend's country house, a dacha. More than anything, she was trying to take a step back from the dangerous, volatile social circle that she'd fallen into. But on that hot July night, the past had caught up with the future. 2 men from the Republic of Ingushetia, 23-year-old Murad Ganazev and 21-year-old Abdulmalik Buzertanov, they arrived at her flat. They were a part of a questionable circle, party buddies, bounded together by substance abuse. They weren't alone. In the original hallway surveillance footage, a total of 4 men were seen entering Elizaveta's apartment that evening. As the night dissolved into a multi-day binge, the atmosphere inside the flat grew increasingly toxic and unstable. Recognizing the warning signs of a bad situation, 2 out of the 4 men made the decision to save their lives. They walked out. Security cameras recorded their exit from the building, leaving just 3 people inside of the apartment. The 2 men who left had stepped out into the night just moments before the drug-induced madness completely hijacked the room. Inside the flat, the air was heavy. They'd been drinking heavily and they'd been consuming banned synthetic drugs. Everyone was severely altered. The chemistry in the room was like a ticking bomb. And it exploded right when Elizaveta fell into an acute state of terrifying hallucinations. According to court testimonies, the paranoia had been contagious. Elizaveta, she began screaming and demanding that the men leave her apartment immediately. But then her mind fractured further. She locked the door, trapped them inside, and refused to let them go. In the middle of the chaos, one of the men, he began praying out loud to cope with the drug-induced panic. That's when Elizaveta snapped. She declared herself a witch who couldn't tolerate the prayers. In their drug-addled minds, the two men didn't see a vulnerable, hallucinating 25-year-old woman. They saw a threat. Here's just a reminder from my own behalf that being high out of your mind isn't an excuse to brutally murder a human being. Regardless of their state, the crime was still murder and the consequences should apply. Anyways, words instantly turned primal. Explosive rage, 3 ordinary kitchen knives were grabbed from the counter. What followed was a frenzy of absolute savagery. According to the final forensic investigation and the indefinite findings of the Saint Petersburg City Court, the 2 suspects didn't just kill her, they acted alternatively. They passed the blade around back and forth, inflicting at least 581 distinct stab wounds, which means this isn't to account for places they might have already stabbed. 581. The wounds were heavily concentrated across her head, neck, chest, and her limbs. In criminal profiling, the term overkill doesn't even begin to describe the sheer mechanics of this attack. It was a relentless, multi-minute slasher. Elizaveta, she'd completely collapsed onto her own floor, dying within minutes from acute blood loss. But the horror didn't stop when her heart did. The drug seemed to have shocked the 2 suspects into a cold, logical survival instinct. Despite the bloodbath around them, the 2 suspects didn't call for help. Instead, they calmly walked over to the kitchen sink, washed the 3 knives, and destroyed any immediate DNA evidence. Then they bypassed the front door entirely to dodge the main lobby, which obviously had security cameras. Opening the window, they climbed out into the hot summer air and slid down an exterior drainage downpipe all the way to the ground. They tossed out the washed weapons into a nearby bush and fled the city. They could have caught a flight, maybe a train. The details aren't specified. All we know is that that very same day that the crime was committed, the 2 suspects fled back to the Republican of Ingushetia that very same day. Behind them, the apartment door remained locked from the outside. Because Elizaveta was drifting away from her regular social circle, no one really realized she was missing. Her body lay in the sweeping summer heat for 4 long days. It wasn't until a neighbor noticed a foul, unmistakable stench sweeping throughout the doorframe into the public halls. Then the police were finally called. The detectives breached the door and they walked into a crime scene that would haunt St. Petersburg's homicide unit for years to come. Now, stating this plainly, Elizaveta wasn't a perfect person. None of us are. She'd lost custody of her child, she'd struggled with substance, she'd invited people into her life who were clearly unstable, but none justified what was done to her. No one deserves to be carved up like that, not in paranoia, not in rage, nor under the influence. This clearly wasn't a self-defense story. No matter how the defendants tried to frame it later, this was a frenzy. It was 2 substance users high out of their minds, turning a domestic conflict into slaughter. Ganazev denied guilt entirely, while his counterpart partially admitted being involved but tried to paint it as a sudden enmity fueled by drugs and her locking the door, throwing the keys out the window, but the court saw through the inconsistencies. They were convicted in murder with particular cruelty by a group acting in prior conspiracy. March 2026, so just a few months ago. Saint Petersburg City Court sentenced both of them to 17 years in a regime penal colony, plus a year of restricted liberty afterwards. They were ordered to pay over 2 million rubles in mortal damages to Elizaveta's mother. One detail that sticks with me, though, is through the pre-trial hearings, Ganazev tried to volunteer for the war inside of Ukraine to potentially sidestep the case. The court rejected it. Justice, at least in this instance, didn't let him trade off one form of accountability for another. True crime often shows us killers who wake up from a drug-fueled haze in panic or in regret, but not here. There were no tears, no anonymous calls to emergency services, no confessions, none even born of a guilty conscience. From the moment the knives were washed to the moment they stood in front of the judge, both the suspects were only focused on one thing: saving themselves. What strikes me at the core of this case is the absolute suffocating absence of remorse. They had violently taken a life from another human being, yet they didn't panic. They didn't even break down. Instead, they moved with a cold, systematic precision, as if they were calmly preparing for a routine exam rather than fleeing a blood-soaked crime scene they had just created. There was no guilt, no final statement of regret, and no acknowledgement for the family that they had just shattered. Instead, the court was met with cold calculations, a flat denial from Ganazev, and a tactical partial admission from Buratinov. Rather than confessing to the brutal slaughter of an innocent woman, they chose to hide behind excuses. It is deeply unsettling how two people can steal a life and feel absolutely nothing afterwards. Everything they did was methodical. Even cynical, they treated the aftermath like, well, not a horrifying crime scene, instead, kind of like a checklist. No guilt, no speeches about how nothing they could do could ever fix the wreckage that they had left behind, just a plain stubborn denial. Two suspects staring at a judge, refusing to look at the reality of a young, innocent woman. Here's what's particularly enraging about this case. It's not just that the killers, that they're incapable of showing any sort of empathy or remorse for the victim. What's striking is that we know that drugs were involved, narcotics and alcohol. The exact compounds weren't publicized, but the effect is clear. Hallucinations, paranoia, lowered inhibition, and a complete collapse of empathy. But still, a 4-year-old lost their mother. A family is left with a hole that 17 years and money can never fill. Neighbors smelled death in their stairwell. This is an abstract policy debate. This is the human cost when a system around addiction, housing instability, and young substance abuse keeps failing people at the margins. I'm not trying to preach about simple answers. I'm just here to say that we should be demanding better ones. Better mental health support, smarter drug policies that treat addiction like a health issue without romanticizing the chaos. Stronger community safeguards so young women like Elizaveta don't fall through every crack at once. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it disappear, it just lets the next file write itself. Elizaveta was planning to leave that circle. She was trying. The attempt makes what happened even more tragic. To her child, her mother, her friend. The pain of losing someone who was still fighting, even imperfectly, is its own special kind of grief. Regardless, that's the end of today's case. Though I have a few questions. What do you think drives people to that extreme level of overkill? Drugs alone, or something a lot darker in human nature that substance just unlocks? Drop your thoughts into the comment section below, and remember, this is the Blxck Archive. Stay sharp, stay questioning, and I will see you in the next file.